They cut the power to my room at 9:01 every night. Not 9, not 9:05, always 9:01. And just before it goes dark, I hear the whisper outside my door. Old people don't need light. That's how it started. I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm 82 years old. I've lived through wartime rations, through the death of a child, through cancer. But something about that whisper, that precise timing, that smug little ritual, it made my blood run cold. The first night I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a glitch. I knocked on the wall. Nothing. Pressed the call button. Nothing. The next morning, when I asked the nurse about it, Marcia, early 40s, that strained smile of someone who doesn't like her job but likes control. She blinked at me and said, "Oh, really? Must have been a fuse." Like I'd imagined it. But it kept happening. Every single night. Same time. Same whisper. And always the light gone. Not just the lamp, but the entire room power. My reading light, the socket for my heated blanket, even the little nightlight I'd brought from home. They said this place was called Larkridge House, a care facility. Luxury for the wise, their brochure said. It had all the right colors: beige walls, pale wood floors, soft jazz in the lobby. But beneath it, something rotted, and I wasn't the only one who smelled it. I'd only been here 3 days when I realized what kind of place this really was. The kind where they smile with their mouths and punish you with silence, where you get branded difficult for asking questions, where they talk about you like you're not in the room. On the 4th night, I stayed awake on purpose. Sat up in bed in my cardigan, the one with the good pockets. I held a pen like a dagger, just to feel something solid in my hand. And right on schedule, I heard it again. Old people don't need light. A man's voice this time, or a boy. Hard to tell, whispery, dismissive. I didn't sleep. At breakfast, they served me cold porridge and told me it was doctor recommended. When I asked if I could at least have some butter, Marcia leaned down and said, "Mrs. Mollison, your digestion isn't what it used to be. Best not to strain it." I used to run a logistics company. I managed a team of 72, balanced millions in supply chains. But here, I was reduced to someone who couldn't be trusted with butter. I began to take notes. I used the back pages of my appointment calendar, wrote everything down: times, faces, phrases, noticed patterns, the way they ignored the woman in 2B when she cried out at night, the way they double-dosed the man down the hall with sleep medication just to keep him quiet, the way food trays were collected half full with no questions asked. I asked for a meeting with the director. They said he was out of town indefinitely. I asked to call my granddaughter. They said my phone was being evaluated for security reasons. That's when I knew this wasn't neglect. This was control. On the 7th night, I found something. I was walking, quietly, slippers barely making a sound, down the east hallway, pretending to have lost my way. There's a utility room there with a keypad. I watched one of the night staff punch in the code earlier. 7319. Inside, breakers. Labeled in tiny print. Room numbers, hall lights, kitchen, boiler. I stood there a long time. I didn't touch anything. Not yet. But I memorized everything. Back in my room, in the dark again, I sat with my notepad on my lap. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something else I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. If they thought I would fade quietly, they were wrong. I've lived through too much. I've lost too much. I am not a shadow. I am not a line item on someone's budget. I am Mabel Loretta Mollison, and I don't give warnings. I give consequences. The next morning, I asked for toast. Just toast. Plain is fine, I said. Marcia smiled. The way you might smile at a child who's drawn something ugly, but thinks it's beautiful. "We're watching your sodium, Mrs. Mollison," she said. "Toast isn't ideal." "I didn't ask for salt," I replied. "I asked for bread and heat." Her smile tightened. "I'll see what I can do." Of course it never came. That's how they work here. It's not overt abuse, it's erosion, little things, subtractions. Until one day, you forget you ever had preferences at all. They moved my chair without asking, took down the framed picture I'd hung near the window, said it was not regulation. My slippers disappeared from the end of the bed. I was issued standard ones, rubbery and 2 sizes too big. The woman in 3D, her name is Eleanor, got scolded for leaving her room after hours. "It's for your own safety," the aide had said, then confiscated her walker for the night. She wet herself at 2 a.m. The call button didn't work. I know because I heard her cry. They don't like noise at Larkridge House. They like silence. And silence is easier when you remove autonomy. But silence also carries sound when you know how to listen. That afternoon, I sat in the common room and watched. Watched who was allowed to speak, who got hushed. Watched which nurses glanced up when someone entered, and which looked down. Watched how every conversation with staff ended with the same phrase, "Let's not worry about that right now." A man named Harold was asking where his cane went. "Let's not worry about that right now." Nadine from the West Wing wondered if the doctor had looked at her blood work. "Let's not worry about that right now." Even when they smiled, it was a smile of containment. I've seen that kind of smile before. In boardrooms. From men who knew they could outweigh a woman's anger by pretending it didn't exist. It doesn't work on me. That night, the light went out again at 9:01. No whisper this time. Just silence. As if they'd moved on from taunting to testing. What would I do next? I sat very still. I'd started keeping the small flashlight from my drawer under my pillow, but I didn't reach for it. I wanted to feel the dark completely. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be denied something so basic, to remember why it mattered. And then I heard a sound. Quiet, like a shuffle. Just outside the room. The door creaked slightly. I didn't speak. Didn't move. A long pause, then retreating steps. They were checking. The next day, I asked for my mail. Marcia said, "You haven't received anything." "That's odd," I said. "My granddaughter sends something every week." Her eyes narrowed a fraction. "Are you sure she's not just busy?" I stared back at her. "She's 26 and studying medicine. She's always busy, but she never forgets." She paused. "I'll double-check with the front desk." She wouldn't. I knew that. But now she knew that I knew. Back in my room, I examined everything. The walls, the outlets, the air vents. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew what it felt like to be watched. In the hallway, I saw a woman I hadn't spoken to before. Tiny, silver-haired, sitting in a corner chair as if she wanted to vanish into it. Her name tag read, June Abner. I'd seen her during meals, never spoke, always ate half her food, eyes lowered. Today, she looked up. "Did they take your books too?" she asked softly. I sat beside her. "No, just the lamp and my toast." She gave a dry little laugh. "They unplugged my radio. Said the batteries were wasteful." I looked at her more closely. Her skin was paper thin, but her gaze sharp. "I think they do it on purpose," she said. "The little things. So you stop asking." I nodded. That's how control works, not all at once. Grain by grain. We sat in silence a while. Then she whispered, "Are you going to report them?" "Who would listen?" I asked. "I would," she said. Then added, "There's more of us than you think." Later, in my room, I sat at the edge of the bed and opened the bottom drawer of my wardrobe. That's where I kept my old planner. Not the facility-issued notebook, but my own. The one I'd used since 1989. It had empty pages still. I wrote down every name I remembered. June, Eleanor, Harold, Nadine. I left space under each one. There are patterns to everything. You just have to chart them. I wasn't ready to fight yet, but I was preparing. And that was enough, for now. It was during lunch on the 10th day that I heard it. "She's going foggy," someone muttered near the serving line. "Sooner or later, they all do." The voice was low, but not low enough. Laughter followed, short, controlled, like something shared in secret. I turned slightly in my chair. It was one of the orderlies, Ryan, early 30s, clean uniform, bad posture. He was talking to the new dietitian, the one with the clipboard and glossy ponytail. They both looked toward Eleanor, who sat hunched over her tray, her soup untouched, her hands shaking. "She asked for her husband again," Ryan said. "He's been dead 10 years. The dietitian smirked. "Well, at least she's not asking for a steak." I wanted to throw my water at them, but I didn't. Instead, I looked around the room. Not one of the residents reacted. Not one word. Just the clink of forks on plastic trays. Because this is how it works in places like Larkridge. Humiliation in broad daylight, wrapped in professionalism. Dismissal disguised as concern. And if you object, they'll make sure the next night is colder, the next breakfast later. I stood up and walked to Eleanor's table. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. She looked up, startled, then nodded slowly. I didn't say anything. I just picked up my spoon and started on the overcooked peas. After a few minutes, she said, "He's not dead. I know he isn't." I didn't argue. I just nodded. "That boy said he was," she added. That I was confused. But I remember the smell of his coat. That doesn't go away. "Smell is memory," I said. "And they can't take that from you." Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. After lunch, I asked for a copy of my care plan. Marcia blinked. "Why would you need that?" "I want to understand how decisions are made about my life." She tilted her head. "You're not required to review that unless there's been a change in your medical status." "Then let's pretend there has been." That earned me a trip to the administrator's office. His name was Calvin Burrow. Late 50s, gray mustache, too tight at the collar. The kind of man who probably practiced empathy in the mirror, but didn't believe in it. "I understand you have concerns, Mrs. Mollison," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I have questions," I replied. "Of course," he said, lacing his fingers. "But let's not assume the worst." "What's the best, Mr. Burrow?" I asked. "That a woman with a professional history, a stable mind, and full faculties must sit in the dark every night because someone decided she doesn't need a light?" He didn't answer that. I continued. "I've reviewed the patient charter. I'm entitled to dignity, autonomy, and access to my own health information." "Indeed," he said, his smile thinning. "But we also have to balance safety. At your age—" "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't say 'at your age' as if it's an illness." He blinked. "I want my records," I said. "All of them. In writing." "We'll have to check with legal." "You do that." I stood to leave. At the door, I added, "And tell your staff. If I hear one more whisper outside my room, I'll record it. I've lived longer than all of you combined. Don't mistake age for weakness." Back in the hallway, June was waiting. "You told him," she said. "I started to. You're going to get flagged." "Already am." That night, the lights stayed on. But the hallway was loud. Deliberately loud. Doors opening and closing. A nurse's radio playing through the walkie at high volume. Someone coughing. Too much, too theatrically. They wanted me awake, not scared, just exhausted. I got out of bed and made tea with the electric kettle they hadn't found yet. Sat by the window and sipped slowly. Let them try. Let them see. In the morning, I got a surprise. My toast was there. 2 slices, perfectly warm. But so was a new note on the breakfast tray. "Please see Nurse Marcia before 10 a.m. Medication review. I didn't take new meds. Hadn't in years. I went anyway. She was all sweetness again. Clipboard in hand. Smile in place. "We're adjusting your supplements," she said. "The doctor prescribed a mild relaxant just to help you sleep." "I sleep fine." "Well, he feels it's better for mood stabilization." "Whose mood?" She looked up sharply. I held out my hand. "Name of the medication, dosage, and interaction profile. I want it all." "You don't need—" "Yes, I do." Another pause. Then she tore off the form and handed it over. I read it. Crossed out the signature line. Wrote refused. No consent given. Dated and signed it myself. Marcia didn't smile when I left. In the hallway, June was sitting in her usual chair. She had a pen in her hand. Not a book, just the pen. She looked up. "Time to start writing," I said, and she nodded. I hadn't looked at the photo in years. It was in the bottom drawer of my wardrobe, tucked beneath the old winter scarf I never wore. A black and white picture, faded at the edges. 3 people on a pier. Me, Harold, and little Nina. He's holding her by the arms, lifting her toward the sky. She's screaming with joy. And I'm watching them, mid-laugh, my hair a wild mess from the wind. I used to think that was the last moment I was fully myself. That morning, I placed the photo on the windowsill. Next to it, I set the only thing in this room that was truly mine. My planner. The one they hadn't taken yet. It wasn't about sentimentality. It was about anchoring. Reminding myself that I didn't come here from nowhere. That I was someone before this room, before the nightly darkness, before the whispers. In the hallway, someone was crying again. It was Harold. Not the one from my photo. A different Harold. 86. Hands curled like seaweed. He'd been vibrant the first few days. Told jokes at breakfast, flirted shamelessly with Eleanor. But last week, they moved him to a new room for monitoring. And since then, he'd barely spoken. I sat with him during the morning activity session, tracing shapes on paper, a humiliating ritual they called cognitive wellness. Harold just looked at his page. "What did they give you?" I asked softly. He blinked. "Something to help me sleep." "You've been asleep 3 days." His mouth twitched. "I see things now." I didn't ask what. I just reached over and placed my hand over his. It felt like holding paper. Still, he squeezed back. That afternoon, I went to June's room. First time either of us had dared cross that threshold. She opened the door quickly, then shut it just as fast. "They monitor hall traffic after lunch," she whispered. 10 minutes max. Her room was nearly identical to mine. Same standard bed, same desk, same chair bolted to the floor. But hers had something mine didn't. A list on the wall. Handwritten. Names. Notes. "You've been watching longer than I have," I said. She nodded. Since March. That's when they stopped inviting family for unscheduled visits. I walked closer. Each name had codes beside it. I recognized some. Room numbers, initials, shorthand diagnoses. But others were cryptic. What's DNL? June's lips tightened. Do not listen. She pointed to her own name. They marked me that way in my file. I overheard it. Because you asked too many questions? Because I remembered things they wanted us to forget. We didn't need to say more. We were the same type of woman. The ones who carry quiet grudges for years, who remember faces, names, dates, not out of spite, but out of principle. Back in my room, I stared again at the photo, at Harold's arms holding Nina, at my smile, careless and open. When Harold died, I didn't cry. I handled everything. Bank accounts, the funeral, the insurance claims. I took over his portion of the business, doubled our logistics contracts within a year. Nina was 11 then, thought I was made of steel. She's 26 now, finishing medical school. She writes every Sunday, calls once a month. She doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm in a retirement village upstate, with community gardens and art classes, as I told her. And why did I lie? Because I didn't want her to worry. Because I still believed that one day I could make this place livable. I don't believe that anymore. That evening, I found my slippers in the common laundry bin. Wet, wrapped in a plastic bag with no tag. Petty, really, but effective. That's the thing about psychological warfare. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It just needs to be repetitive. I dried them myself with a towel, set them near the radiator, which only gave off a faint, lukewarm breath. The room felt cold, but I didn't care. Because now I had a plan. It wasn't fully formed, but it had weight. And weight is what you need when everything else is slipping. The breaker room, the schedule June kept, the medications Harold had been given, the silencing, the coded terms in files. It wasn't just about me. It was about the dozens of people here who no longer had the energy or the mind to resist. They were dimming us on purpose. And I'd spent too long in boardrooms and courtrooms not to know how to push back. I sat at the desk and wrote a letter. Not a complaint, a report, with dates, names, observations, not opinion, facts. 3 pages in neat cursive. I signed it and slid it into an envelope. Tomorrow, I'd try to get someone on the outside to take it. If I couldn't, I'd find another way. Because when they switch off your light, the answer isn't to wait for it to come back. The answer is to make sure the whole building notices the dark. The first time I saw the staff laugh at June, she was struggling to open a juice box. Her hands shook, and the little plastic straw wouldn't pierce the foil. She tried again and again. A young aide, Leanne, barely old enough to vote, stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with amusement. When June finally got the straw in, juice splattered on her blouse. Leanne let out a little giggle. "Almost got it," she said, turning away before June could look up. I was across the room. I said nothing. Not because I agreed, because I was watching. People like Leanne didn't know how to hide their cruelty yet. That would come with age and polished smiles. For now it slipped out raw, like an untrained reflex. Later, June sat beside me on the patio. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, eyes on the dying rosebush they never bothered to water. "They think it's funny," she said. "How long it takes me to do things. How slow I walk. How much I forget." "You don't forget as much as they think," I said. She nodded slowly. That's what scares them. We sat in silence for a while. Then she whispered, I think they want me to give up. They want all of us to, I replied. That night, her room went dark before mine. 8:52. I looked at the wall clock, listened, waited, and heard it. A knock. Not loud. 2 soft taps. Then silence. Then the click of her door locking from the outside. I got up and pressed my ear to my own door. Nothing. The hallway was still. Too still. By the time I stepped back, the light flicked off. 9:01. They were controlling us by routine. That was clear. Not through force. Through rules. Predictability. Shut down by schedule. But people like me, people who'd spent years reading boardroom contracts and negotiating shipping deadlines, knew one thing better than anyone else. You want to control a system? You first learn how it moves. And I was learning. Next morning, I slipped a note into June's hand during breakfast. 2 p.m., East Hall utility closet, 5 mins. Come alone. She nodded without looking up. We met behind the linen cart. She was nervous. So was I. But I kept my voice even. You told me before you overheard something about your file, I said. What exactly did you hear? She hesitated. Then, that I was no longer reliable for independent testimony. That I was flagged. Testimony? She nodded. There was an audit. 3 years ago. State inspection. I told the agents they'd been changing meds without notice. After that, they moved me to the end wing, switched my prescriptions, started saying I was disoriented. I felt a slow chill spread through my chest. They punish truth here, she said. But they do it quietly. Back in my room, I retrieved the envelope I'd written the night before. The report. I had no address for the state, no contact name. But I had a name I trusted. My granddaughter Nina. If I could get the letter out with a staff member on an errand, or slip it into one of the delivery bins, I knew she'd act. She wouldn't ignore something like this. Not after what she saw me go through when Harold died. I added a second letter inside. Just for her. Sweetheart, you always said I was stronger than I looked. I need you to believe that now. Read everything. Then decide what to do. But please, don't stay silent. The risk was enormous. If they caught it, I'd lose everything. My few freedoms, my planner, maybe even the right to stay here. But I'd already lost my comfort, my peace. I had nothing left to fear but nothingness. I tucked the envelope into a plastic sleeve and sealed it with tape. Tomorrow, I'd make my move. Tonight, I'd wait again in the dark, but not quietly. At breakfast, they gave me different pills. 3 instead of 1. A pale green tablet I didn't recognize, and 2 soft gels without markings. I held them in my palm, watching them dissolve slightly from the heat of my skin. You're due for a new regimen, Marcia said lightly. Doctor's orders. What doctor? I asked. She blinked. Your assigned GP. It's all in your chart. I'd like to speak to him. He's not on site today. I'll wait. Marcia's lips tightened. We'll schedule you. I didn't take the pills. I set them neatly back on the tray. She looked at me the way a parent might look at a child refusing to eat. Mabel, she said gently, you don't want to make things harder. I smiled. No, I really don't. She took the tray away without another word. At 11 a.m., they moved me to a new room. No warning, no explanation. An aide I didn't recognize, a man with thinning blonde hair and a blank stare, wheeled a cart into my room and began folding my clothes. He didn't ask. He didn't speak. Just folded and packed. Where are we going? I asked. He didn't answer. I followed, walking slowly behind him down the corridor. The East Wing. End of the hall. Room 214. Smaller, no window, no lamp. This is temporary, the aide said, finally speaking. While we do some maintenance in your old room. There was nothing wrong with my old room. They were isolating me, like they did to Harold, like they did to June. I sat on the bed and looked around. The mattress was harder. The wall scuffed near the floor, like a chair had scraped against it over and over. No one had painted this room in years. June came to visit at 3C. She stood in the doorway, visibly tense. They said you requested a quieter location, she whispered. I didn't. I know. She looked around. This is where they put Eleanor before the fall. I met her eyes. They're hoping I'll get tired, quiet, maybe confused. But you're not. No, I said. I'm just angry. That night, the lights didn't just go out. The door locked from the outside. I heard the click. Clear, deliberate. They were done pretending. I sat in the dark, back against the wall, listening. No hallway sounds. No footsteps. Just the hum of a building used to silence. I stayed that way for 2 hours. Then I got up. I found my flashlight under the bed where they hadn't looked. I opened the closet and took out the envelope, the letter to Nina. I waited until 5 a.m. Morning shift. Different staff. Less alert. When the hallway lights flicked on, I stood by the door, listening. A cart rolled by. Laundry. I opened the door a crack, just wide enough to see the aide's back turned. I stepped out, slid the envelope into the second hamper bag, and closed the lid softly. It was out. Or at least I had to believe it was. That afternoon, June wasn't at lunch. I asked Marcia. She's resting. She never misses lunch. Today she is. I left my tray untouched and walked back to my room. Door still locked, but they'd forgotten the vent. Near the floor, behind the bed, was an old square vent cover, screwed in, but loose. I took my nail file, yes, I still kept one, and began unscrewing. It took time. My fingers ached. But by dinner, the cover was off. Inside, dust, a crumpled tissue, and a direct line into the hall system. More importantly, the hallway utility closet was just 2 doors down. I knew because I'd studied the building plans in the front lobby weeks ago, back when I was still pretending to settle in. That night, I waited again in the dark. Not because I was afraid, because I was ready. Ready to stop reporting. Ready to act. It took 3 days for them to notice I wasn't folding. 3 days in room 214, no window, no visits, no medication. I refused the pills, ate only what I brought in myself, stayed silent during check-ins, and never asked for help. They hate that, you know, when you don't ask. On the 3rd day, Calvin Burrow came to see me. He didn't knock, just opened the door and stepped inside, arms crossed, trying to look casual. Mrs. Mollison, he said, you've been uncooperative. I looked up from my chair. Is that a medical term? He didn't smile. We've made efforts to accommodate your preferences, but this level of resistance is concerning. Concerning to whom? To the operation of this facility. Ah, there it is. He took a step closer. You've been moved for your safety, but you've chosen to interpret that as punishment. Did I interpret the locked door too? I asked. The unknown medication? The unplugged phone? The complete removal of privacy? He stiffened. I've worked in logistics, Mr. Burrow. You don't have to say the word containment for me to recognize it. He sighed. You're creating instability among the other residents. By speaking, by stirring. We stared at each other. Then he said something I didn't expect. Your granddaughter sent an email. I sat up straighter. What? She received a letter. Unclear how it was delivered. But she's contacted our board, accusing us of misconduct. I said nothing. She's threatened legal action. Still nothing. She's planning a visit tomorrow. There it was. He wanted to rattle me, to force me to react, to panic. But he didn't know me. I smiled. Wonderful, I said. I'll tidy up. He hesitated, then left without another word. The second the door closed, I stood. Because now I had a clock ticking. One day, 24 hours to collect everything, evidence, voices, proof. I knocked on the wall. 2 soft taps, our signal. A minute later, June opened the vent panel from her side. You heard? I whispered. She nodded. They've been talking about it all morning. Panic mode. We need copies. Of what? Incident logs, medication records, visitor logs, the works. That's locked in admin. I reached into my closet. Pulled out the small toolkit I'd smuggled in from Harold's Old Things weeks ago. He used it for glasses repair. I used it for everything else. I need 5 minutes with Burroughs' door unattended. June hesitated. That's suicide. Then make it a good one. That afternoon, during the weekly staff meeting, Calvin left his office. June confirmed it through our hallway code system. Paper cups with lines scratched on them. I walked in through the side hallway. His office smelled like air freshener and nervous sweat. The files were in a locked cabinet. Simple pin lock. Took 90 seconds. I didn't steal anything, just took photos. Medication logs, altered. Visitor entries, doctored. Dosage overrides, emergency call button overrides. 3 reports of residents requesting transfer, with notes saying, no further action taken. I sent everything to Nina. 10 photos, no caption. She'd understand. By the time I got back to my room, the door was open. They'd searched it. The bed was stripped. The drawers overturned. But they hadn't found the vent. Or the backup flash drive I'd tucked in the hollow leg of the chair. I sat down calmly. A storm was coming, and I wanted to be wide awake when it landed. They started watching me openly after that. Not the subtle kind of watching. No more side glances or whispered notes in binders. Now it was full stares in the hallway. 2 staff instead of 1 during meal escorts. A mental wellness evaluation suddenly placed on my calendar. Just routine, they said. I didn't attend. When I skipped the session, Marcia showed up at my door with a clipboard and a forced smile. Mabel, dear, we're concerned. So am I, she blinked. About what? That you think I'm stupid. The smile flickered, then returned. No one thinks that. We just want you to feel supported. I tilted my head, then unlock my door, return my phone, and stop treating me like I'm on trial. She didn't answer, just backed away slowly, as if I were the unstable one. That afternoon, I heard wheels squeaking outside my door. A cart, then the shuffle of paper, a metallic click. When I opened the door 10 minutes later, the hallway was empty. But a new poster hung beside my nameplate. Safety reminder. Residents with signs of confusion may be subject to supervised routines. For their protection. My name wasn't on it, but it didn't need to be. Everyone would see it. Everyone would know. June appeared in the doorway later, pale and tight-lipped. They're trying to mark you, she said. Make you an example. Let them try, I said. But tomorrow, everything changes. Because at 10:03 that morning, I'd received a single-line email from Nina. Coming at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Don't let them move you. They'd try. I knew it. And I wasn't going to let it happen. That night I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the wall, flashlight pointed toward the vent, backpack at my side. Inside the bag, all the documentation I could gather. Photos, copied reports, written statements from June, Eleanor, and even Harold before they silenced him. Dates, times, signatures, everything they tried to erase, I preserved. They couldn't gaslight me if I kept the evidence alive. At 7:00 a.m., someone knocked. A uniformed staff member I'd never seen. "Mrs. Mollison, time for a room inspection." I stood. "There's nothing to inspect." He didn't move. "We need to relocate you, temporarily. Maintenance issue." "No." He raised an eyebrow. "It's not optional." "I'd like to call my lawyer," I said calmly. He stiffened. "You don't have—" "I do. You'll find the number under Nina Lore Mollison, JD candidate. Unless you want a civil suit before breakfast, I suggest you back away from my door." He left, quickly. At 9:15, Marcia returned. This time, she brought Calvin. He didn't look smug anymore, just tired, edges fraying. "Mabel," he said, "we'd really prefer to have this meeting in the conference room." "No." He glanced at the hallway camera. "Please don't escalate this." "I'm not escalating," I said. "I'm refusing." Silence. He leaned in slightly. "She's not going to believe you." I tilted my head. "Then why are you sweating?" They left without further threats. At 2:58 p.m., I waited in the hallway, hair brushed, jacket pressed, backpack on my lap. Other residents watched from their doors, quiet, curious. At exactly 3, the front doors opened. Nina walked in, and she looked exactly like I had at her age. Sharp-eyed, jaw-set, wearing a navy coat and a look that could tear paper in half. She spotted me immediately. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't run. She just walked over, crouched beside my chair, and said, "Grandma, I got everything. You did good." Behind her, Calvin hovered. Nina turned without standing. "We'll be requesting all records, starting with visitor logs and medical files." Calvin opened his mouth. Nina didn't wait. "And if you delay, I'll file an injunction. You have 24 hours. I didn't speak, didn't need to. Because for the first time since I'd arrived at Larkridge House, someone in power stood beside me. And they didn't whisper. They said everything out loud. By 4 p.m., the entire facility knew something had shifted. Staff walked quieter. Doors opened slower. Even the music in the lobby, a bland loop of piano instrumentals, had been turned off. Silence, the kind that usually served them, now worked against them. Because silence amplifies tension. And they were rattled. Nina stayed for 2 hours. No raised voices, no threats, just calm, clear requests. I'd like to see her chart. I'd like the logs for medication administration over the last 6 months. Please bring the resident rights documentation from intake. Every time someone tried to stall, she'd raise an eyebrow. That was all. The eyebrow did the work. It said, "I'm young, I'm polite, but I will bury you in paperwork and filings until this place closes." Before she left, she sat with me in my room, room 214, still locked from the outside. "This is going to take time," she said softly. "But they're exposed now." I nodded. "And you," she added, "you're terrifying." I smiled. "Takes one to know one." She took my hand. "I'll be back next week, but in the meantime, no more acting alone." I wasn't. I told her about June. About Eleanor? About Harold? About the quiet rebellion already unfolding in paper cups and vent shafts. Nina stood, walked to the desk, and pulled out her phone. "Start documenting everything," she said. "Create an incident log. Photos, dates, names. Build the archive. When it's time to go to the state, we bring more than just stories. We bring the record. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not victory, direction. She hugged me before she left. And then she did one last thing. She unlocked my door. Not with a code. With a key she'd demanded from Calvin and refused to return. "I'm not locking my grandmother in a room like an inmate," she'd said. "Not one more night." When she left, the hallway was silent again. But now, people peeked out from behind their doors, eyes wide. They'd seen her. They'd seen what a visitor with power could do. And they wanted more. That night, June and I met in the laundry room. It was the only place without cameras. The only place staff avoided after 8 p.m. They didn't like the damp, the noise, the unpredictability of the old machines. We stood between the dryers, whispering. "She was incredible," June said. "I heard her in the hall. Calvin looked like he was about to swallow his own tongue." "She's got fight," I replied. "But she needs time. Legal time. We need to hold the ground until she comes back." "How?" "We make noise. Noise gets punished. Only if it's solo. But what if 5 of us ask for our records on the same day? 10? What if the morning medline stops moving because everyone wants to verify their dose?" June blinked. "They'd panic." "Exactly. We make them show who they really are." The next morning, June asked for her chart at breakfast. So did Eleanor. So did Nadine. By lunch, 5 more had done the same. By dinner, Ryan the orderly had snapped at a resident. "What's the matter with all of you?" "That's what resistance looks like," I wanted to say. But I didn't. Because it wasn't about slogans. It was about making them uncomfortable in the same routines they use to control us. That night, I stood by the window of room 214, the one with no view, and stared into the dark reflection of myself. For months, they'd tried to make us invisible. But you can't erase people who remember who they are, and tomorrow more would remember. I'd make sure of it. It happened at 3:17 a.m. A blink, a breath, then everything went dark. Not just my room, the entire West Wing, lights, emergency indicators, the soft hum of the hallway vents. Gone. Silence poured in like floodwater. I sat up slowly, heart thudding, not from fear, but from awareness. June had done it. 2 nights earlier, we'd mapped out the sequence, how to trigger a localized breaker drop without alerting the master console. The panel in the East Utility Room, neglected, barely labeled, wasn't even connected to the central alert system. Someone had bypassed it years ago, probably to save money. It took 15 minutes to reboot manually. We'd practiced it once, in theory. Tonight was the trial. I waited, ears sharp. Footsteps in the hall, a sharp voice. Then, "What the hell?" Ryan. Always Ryan. Irritated, entitled. "Get the backup lights. Marcia, where's the panel key?" They didn't know yet. Didn't know that someone inside this building understood more about its bones than the people paid to maintain it. I peeked through the door crack. In the dark, movement slowed. Aides fumbling with flashlights. Residents murmuring behind closed doors. They weren't afraid, though, because darkness isn't terrifying when you're used to it. It's clarity. It's control. By 3:32, the lights flicked back on. Not all, just partial. I saw June at breakfast later. She didn't say a word. Just looked at me across the table and nodded once. It had worked. They called it a fuse issue. Sent a technician who looked confused and left without fixing anything. But I knew what we'd done. We'd taken our first step. That afternoon, 3 residents refused medication. 2 more asked to speak with the director. Nadine announced, loudly, that she would no longer answer to her compliance plan unless someone read it to her in full. They didn't know how to respond. It wasn't a riot, wasn't violence. It was bureaucratic noise. And institutions don't know how to process resistance wrapped in paperwork. Marcia pulled me aside near the nurse's station. "Mabel," she said in a tight whisper, "we understand you're frustrated, but encouraging agitation among the others won't help your case." "My case?" She didn't answer. I stepped closer. "You locked a woman in her room at night. You overmedicated a man into silence. You withheld mail, phone calls, basic human choices." Still, she said nothing. So I leaned closer, lowering my voice until only she could hear. "And now you're scared because the lights went out, and you realized we're still here in the dark." Her face tightened, but she walked away. That night, June and I met again. This time in the stairwell, cold concrete under our feet, the hum of the building pressing against the walls like a heartbeat. "I could take out the whole panel," she said quietly. "One floor at a time, 5 minutes each." "They'd notice." "Exactly." I looked at her. "Not yet," I said. "We're not ready for the full blackout. We need to be seen first." She nodded slowly. "The quiet won't last." "I know," I said. "That's the point. Because soon, they would stop pretending. And when they did, I'd be ready to shut them down completely." It started at 6:42 p.m., just before dinner. The lights in the east wing flickered once, then went out. 12 seconds later, the hallway alarms in the central corridor went silent. By 6:44, every floor except the front office was in darkness. I stood in room 214, bag packed, jacket on, June's watch ticking in my pocket, and waited. No footsteps, no voices, just the stillness of systems failing. Then, one by one, the emergency lights blinked on, not overhead, at the floor level, faint, reddish, designed to guide people to exits during a fire. They cast long, narrow shadows, shadows that moved when no one moved. I opened my door and stepped into the hall. June was already there, flashlight in hand. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We walked quietly, turning toward the central lounge. Inside, chaos. Ryan barked orders into a walkie-talkie that didn't respond. Marcia stood by the medical cart, frozen, unsure whether to stay or flee. And the residents, oh, the residents, they were everywhere. Out of their rooms, moving, talking, some laughing, some crying. Some just blinking into the red light like people waking from a long, cruel sleep, because no one had told them to stay still. No one had locked the doors. No one could. I stepped into the center of the room. A few turned toward me, then a few more. June stood beside me, her flashlight pointed at the ceiling. "We're not here to scare you," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "We're not here to cause harm, but harm has already been done." More turned, more listened. For months, years for some of you, they've kept us quiet with medicine and patronizing smiles. They've taken your lights, your choices, your voices, one by one. A murmur moved through the crowd. "But tonight," I continued, "you are not alone. Tonight, you get to choose." I looked around the room. Sit in the dark with your thoughts, or walk outside, or speak, or demand your file, or eat what you want, or just be. I didn't raise my hand, didn't raise a fist. I simply turned off my flashlight and stood still, in the dark. And one by one, they joined me. Not in protest, in presence. We stood for 5 minutes. Then someone clapped. Once. Then again. Louder. And suddenly, Voices rose. Not angry, not frightened. Alive. The staff panicked. Marcia tried to herd people back to their rooms. Ryan barked into the dead walkie again. Another aide ran to the front desk, calling for help. But no one moved. Not one of us. Not until the building flickered and whined, and the power returned at 6:57. Full lights, buzzing vents, cameras blinking back to life, and the spell broke. But it was too late, because we had already been seen, because when they looked at us now, we weren't silent outlines in our rooms. We were people, dozens of us, awake, aware, together. And the building, this place that had once controlled every second of our days, couldn't unsee what had happened. They could write reports. They could call it a malfunction. But we would know. We had turned off their power. And in the dark, we'd found our own. It began at 6:42 p.m., just before dinner. First, the lights in the East Wing flickered. Then they went out completely. By 6:44, half the building was dark. No alarms, no staff announcements, just a quiet, creeping failure. I stood in my room, calm, jacket on, bag ready. June had given me the signal with 3 knocks on the wall 10 minutes earlier. It was time. I opened the door. In the hall, emergency lights glowed faint and red, casting shadows that swayed like smoke. The walls felt closer than usual, the air different, thick with waiting. Residents stepped out of their rooms, blinking, cautious. No staff in sight. June appeared beside me, flashlight in hand. She didn't say anything, just nodded. We walked toward the lounge. Inside, chaos. Ryan shouted into a silent walkie. Marcia hovered over the med cart, wide-eyed. Aides whispered frantically near the stairs. But no one ran. And the residents? They were moving. Not confused, not scared. Awake. Present. Some were talking. Some just stood still, arms crossed, looking at the staff for the first time without fear. I stepped forward, into the center of the room. "Don't be afraid," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it spread. "They've kept us quiet with pills and locked doors, told us what we could eat, when to sleep, what to forget. But not tonight." More heads turned. "Tonight, you get to decide." I turned off my flashlight. One by one, others did the same. We stood in the dark, in silence, together. Then someone clapped. Once, then again. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, someone laughed without being shushed. Marcia stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Please, everyone, back to your rooms." No one moved. We weren't being disobedient. We were being still, and that was worse, because stillness is strength when it's chosen. At 6:57, the lights came back on, buzzing overheads, blinking cameras, everything humming like before. But it wasn't the same, because now they'd seen us, not just as patients, but as people, and we weren't going back. The next morning, they rolled in a consultant. Clipboard, white coat, smiled like a news anchor. "Dr. Gwen Nichols," she said, extending a hand. "I'm here to help de-escalate and listen." She didn't ask for my version of the story. She asked about my feelings. "Do you feel you've been treated unfairly?" I looked at her and said, "Do you feel safe standing here without locking the door behind you?" She blinked. They'd lost control of the narrative. That's what this was. Damage management? Optics. Dr. Nichols spent exactly 7 minutes with me, nodded through everything, and made no notes. Later, I saw her in the garden with Marcia, laughing. The next day, I was given a new room. Back in the West Wing, it had a window, a proper chair, and working outlets. They didn't say it was an apology, but I knew what it was: repositioning, reframing. I was no longer a risk to be locked away. Now I was a witness to be placated. June's room stayed where it was. No upgrades, no flowers, no coat of fresh paint. I asked why. She didn't make a scene, Marcia said. That's how they measure worth here. Not by who you are, but by how loud your file has gotten. At lunch, Eleanor sat next to me. First time since before the blackout. They changed my pills, she said quietly. Back to what I had last winter. I asked why, and they didn't argue. Harold had his cane back. Nadine got her phone privileges restored. Small shifts, reversals, like a building trying to quietly undo its own damage without admitting it had ever cracked. I didn't trust it. But I logged every change. In a new notebook Nina had mailed me, leather-bound, navy blue. She'd written on the first page, "Keep the record. Let them remember you remembered." On Thursday, 2 new residents arrived. Women, late 70s. Sharp eyes. One of them walked with a cane like it was a weapon. I sat near them in the lounge, pretending to read. They whispered about the intake process, the private tour, the wellness pledges. They say they'll check on us every night, one muttered. They say a lot of things, I said, without looking up. She turned toward me. You've been here long? Long enough. She waited. I closed the book. If your room goes dark at 9:01, don't ask questions. What should I do? Start watching. June walked past, offering one of her small, quiet smiles. It didn't need to be loud anymore. The fire had already caught, and I wasn't the only one holding the match. They started offering yoga, twice a week. Soft music, lavender towels, a young woman in bright leggings telling us to breathe from the hips. It was almost funny. After everything, after locked doors, whispering orderlies, unauthorized pills, and blackout nights, they thought wellness sessions would fix it. June and I went anyway. Not for the stretching, for the numbers. 15 residents showed up the first day, 22 the second. And during those sessions, we talked. Quietly, carefully. But we talked. Did you get your records back? Who's your new doctor? Have you heard from your family? I learned Nadine's daughter had contacted a patient advocate. Harold's nephew, a lawyer, had submitted a formal request for all medical authorizations. Eleanor had begun journaling, in ink, line by line, every time someone adjusted her medication. They couldn't stop it now. Whatever control they once held had bled out through 1,000 paper cuts. Not chaos, clarity. I received my first scheduled phone call at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. A real call. My phone, in my room, no one listening. Nina's voice came through clear and warm. I filed the formal complaint with the state, she said. You won't hear from them right away, but it's in motion. Will it help? It already is. They've started reviewing staffing ratios across all long-term care facilities in the region. I didn't say anything. You sound tired, she added. I'm not. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you're not scared anymore, are you? No, I said. Because fear needs isolation, and I wasn't alone anymore. Calvin disappeared without a word. One morning he was in the hallway, clipboard in hand. That evening, gone. They said it was a planned transition. We knew better. Marcia stayed, but she didn't meet anyone's eyes anymore. She walked quickly, spoke quietly, always holding something in her hands, papers, a tablet, a tray, like it might shield her from the weight of what she'd allowed. Some staff left. New ones arrived. Younger, more careful. Some of them asked questions. What's your preferred routine? Is there anything you'd like changed? I didn't answer kindly. Not at first. They needed to earn it. June turned 84. We held a celebration in the common room. No decorations, just lemon cake, black coffee, and the truth. 20 people came. Someone played piano. Someone else read aloud from a mystery novel. And June, for the first time since I'd known her, laughed like she didn't owe anyone an apology. I gave her a small silver pin from my suitcase. It used to be Harold's, from a trade convention decades ago. She held it in her hand for a long time. You think they'll ever try again? She asked. Maybe, I said. Somewhere else, with other names, other scripts. But not here. No, I said. Not here. Because now, even if the light went out again at 9:01, it wouldn't go out for long. They held a town hall meeting the following week. Folded chairs, lemon water, a banner printed too fast that said, "Your voice matters." I almost laughed. Calvin was still gone. In his place sat a younger man in a beige suit who introduced himself as Greg, interim administrator, here to rebuild trust. He used phrases like moving forward and restoring dignity. He never once said, sorry. That's how institutions apologize, by avoiding the past and offering us seating arrangements instead. I didn't speak, but others did. Nadine read her daughter's letter aloud. Eleanor asked why her walker had been replaced 3 times in a year. June stood, quiet and calm, and said, before you rebuild anything, you need to say what was broken. Greg smiled, a little thinner after that. The meeting ended early. Afterward, a girl from the staff approached me. Early 20s, dark curls, steady voice. I've only been here 2 weeks, she said. But I've read about what happened. I looked at her. She didn't blink. She added, if anything ever seems off again, anything at all, I'll come to you. I believed her. Because she hadn't been trained yet to hide things behind her teeth. That evening, I found a small white envelope under my door. No name, no address. Inside, a folded note in precise handwriting. Thank you for what you did. I thought no one noticed. 3D. Eleanor. It was the first time she'd ever written anything down. I tucked it inside my planner. The old one. The one I'd nearly abandoned when I first arrived. It was heavier now, literally. Full of notes, records, clipped printouts, names. But it wasn't a log of pain anymore. It was a record of return, of selves restored, choices reclaimed, theft reversed by memory. At 9 p.m., I sat in my new chair. Yes, they gave me one that actually fit, and looked out the window. Room 214 was far behind me now. I missed it, in a way. Not the cold or the isolation, but the clarity it gave me. Sometimes it takes a locked door to remind you where the hinges are. June knocked once, then came in. No need to whisper anymore. I heard from someone, she said. One of the women in 1C. She used to be a nurse. She's been tracking when the orderlies rotate shifts. And she said the patterns are still there. Not cruel, not loud, but subtle. Some are slipping back. Of course they were. Nothing stays clean forever. Power finds cracks. But cracks can be filled. I looked at her. Then we keep watching. She nodded. And remembering. We sat together for a while. No tea, no plans. Just 2 women in their 80s, not sleeping, not afraid. At exactly 9:01, the lights stayed on. No flicker, no silence. Just a room, a woman, a window, and nothing they could take back. They called it a transition audit. State representatives, laptops, clipboards, Shoes too clean for a place like this. They didn't knock. Just arrived one morning and set up in the lounge. I watched from the hallway. They weren't rude, weren't warm either. They asked questions with empty eyes. How long have you been here? Do you feel safe? Do you have access to your personal belongings? Everyone answered. But the answers weren't what changed things. It was how they answered. Clearly, without hesitation, without glancing at staff for permission. Some even asked questions back. What happens to our reports after you leave? Will we be informed of your findings? That's what scared them, the ones in charge. Not noise, not darkness, but clarity. Because once people know how to name what's been done to them, it can't be undone. A week later, I received a letter. Official seal. My name printed properly. It was from the Department of Health. They'd opened a formal investigation. Larkridge House would be under oversight for no less than 9 months. No denials, no spin, just a list of actions, a list of consequences. They were subtle ones: mandatory training, staff restructuring, visitor transparency. But they were real, and more importantly, they were public. Nina called that evening. You did it, she said. No, I said. We did it. You know they'll try again. Somewhere else, always. She paused. What now? Now? Now I eat my toast while it's hot. I ask for butter and they bring it. I keep my window open. I sit in the sun when it shines. I walk the halls without asking. I write. Not complaints, but memory. Small memories. Bits of voices. The color of Eleanor's cardigan. The way Harold used to mutter numbers under his breath like spells. The way June looked the first time she allowed herself to smile without apology. I write it all. Because what they really wanted wasn't silence. It was erasure. And what they got instead was a witness. This morning, I passed a new woman in the dining room. Nervous eyes, hands twitching at her lap. She was staring at the call button like it might bite. I sat across from her. Quiet. After a moment, I said, They used to turn off the lights here. On purpose. Every night at 9:01. She looked at me, startled. They don't anymore, I said. Because we didn't let them. She watched me carefully. We? I nodded. A few of us at first, then more. She didn't speak again. But later, I saw her in the hallway, pressing her call button to ask for a blanket, and waiting, upright, until they brought it. She didn't say thank you. She didn't apologize for asking. That's how it begins. Not with revolution, but with a blanket. A voice. A woman who remembers who she is. If you've read this far, remember this. Sometimes the system breaks you softly. Not with fists, but with clipped smiles and quiet doors. And sometimes the only way out is not to leave, but to turn on the light. So share this. Tell someone. Tell everyone. Because somewhere right now, they're whispering outside another door, and someone like me is listening.